Well, as stakeholders discuss the way forward for Africa's agricultural sector, let's get some more insight into the progress made so far. We're joined now by Professor Kevin Urama from the African Development Bank Group. He's joining us in Aberdeen in the UK. Great to have you with us today, Professor. Now, of course, this year's status report from AGRA pretty much highlights the fact that the African region has made some impressive progress since 2000 in the agricultural sector. But of course, Africa's food systems still remain pretty fragile. Now, we know the AU has made several declarations, but the continent still remains a net food importer. It's also been ravaged by poor yields and adverse weather. Give us a sense of why these declarations rarely translate into tangible changes in food output in Africa and, of course, changes in farmers' incomes as well.
Thank you very much for having me. As you rightly pointed out, Africa has made huge progress since the year 2000. Our report shows that Africa recorded the highest agricultural output growth of all regions of the world. So this is something to be celebrated. The output in agriculture grew by 4.3%, which is about double of the average in the world, which is 2.7%. And also double for the triple what Africa has done in the previous 3 decades ago. So this shows that African governments and agricultural stakeholders are doing a great job. But the limitation there is that output growth is coming, 75% of it is coming mainly from basically areal expansion. So the more we expand the land we crop, the land we use for agriculture, and then we increase the agricultural output. So what the report is calling for is to increase the component of agricultural productivity that is coming from technology, that is coming from knowledge, that's coming from innovation. Basically, what we call factor productivity, getting more out of the same piece of land or the same piece of factors of production that we put into agriculture. Currently, we have made some progress, but the progress is small compared to the rest of the world. We only have about 25% of productivity growth coming from that kind of activity. And the question you ask is very clear. African governments have made huge declarations and very clear policy strategies. But the challenge is that the agricultural and food systems are very complex. It has to do with macroeconomic stability. It has to do with trade and investments. It has to do with technology. It has to do with innovation. And these are some of the levers of change that Africa needs to rethink how it addresses in terms of how do we create innovation and capacity for innovation and technology, which is where that productivity growth we're looking for is coming from.
Right. Well, looking forward, the potential is huge, as you mentioned. The prospect of a single market under the African Continental Free Trade Area, that presents vast opportunities for agribusiness going forward. But of course, the question lies, what do we need to do within the CFTA in order to enhance food security across Africa? What are the discussions taking place, especially at this AGRA summit?
Yeah, the CFTA presents huge opportunities for Africa to leverage its market size, which is what we've not been doing so well. Intra-regional trade in Africa has just been at a paltry 15% compared to 61% in Asia and 67% in Europe. So we need to try to leverage that huge agreement that African countries have reached to increase regional trade on the continent. And to increase regional trade on the continent, we need to deal with several things. For me, the key one are both trade and non-trade tariffs that we have that creates barriers for movement of agricultural products from one country to the other. If I give you the statistics, it's a little bit mind-boggling. It's often easier to import food from outside of Africa than to import from one country in Africa to the other. And the reasons are diverse. Infrastructure. The road networks, the ports, the airports, the air travel, and all these things are very cumbersome. So we really need to invest in that hard infrastructure to create the infrastructure that we need to support that trade that we're talking about. And then also the movement of people between countries and so on. There are several issues that needs to be addressed And the ACFTA is actually taking that head on. And the time is not on our side and this interview to go through all the issues that are already going on.
It's quite a large subject. But of course, we have to mention the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic, it did, as the reports say, add another complex layer to other food security threats on the continent. So how much of a setback and an opportunity has this pandemic been for Africa's agricultural sector?
Yeah, in my view, the greatest setback that the pandemic has created for Africa is in the area of squeezing the fiscal space, already squeezed fiscal space on the continent. And countries then are struggling to find the finances required to invest in the sectors. You talked about the agreements reached before, like the Maputo Declaration to invest 10%. But if you see what is going on the continent now with increasing debt burden and several things that countries now need to address because of addressing the impacts of COVID-19, that creates a diversion from investing in agriculture, investing in agri-food systems, and so on. Africa's economy has contracted about 2.1% in 2020. We are projecting that it will recover to about 3.4% in 2021, but that recovery is dependent on several things: the price of commodities, access to vaccines, and several things that some of them are actually not within the control of African governments in that way. So that creates a setback. But then the opportunity it creates is to rethink how we do agriculture. That's why I'm very happy that this year, AGRA and the AGRF has focused on agri-food systems to think about an integrated way of how we can grow agriculture as a complex but yet simplified way of improving productivity, enhancing trade, and leveraging the youth that we have, the women that we have, huge population dividends that we have, and the huge market that Africa provides. Africa being a continent that has over 65% of remaining arable land on Earth and the most youthful population on Earth, we have really huge opportunities to feed ourselves and leverage that opportunity that ACFTA and the other policies that our leaders have already put in place presents for us to do. And these are the things that this AGRF is looking at. That's what the report of was looking at as well. What are those transformative actions that we can implement in order to move that forward?
And on that note, I know this year's report did aim to elevate the African voices in the sector. But when we say that the goal is to identify and develop an African approach, what does that really mean?
That means quite a lot at several levels. In the sense of what I've called in the beginning of this interview, the levers of change that we need. Africa needs to begin to develop locally driven technologies that are adaptable to our own agroecological systems, to our own local conditions, to our own local tastes, and so on. But that requires investment in order to do that. So saying that Africa needs to have a voice, it's not that Africa should do it alone, because it will need a lot of partnerships, research partnerships, technology and innovation sharing, knowledge sharing, capacity building, and so on that needs to be done. But at the same time, we're also calling for Africa to be given the agency that it requires to be able to do all these things. Because quite often we've seen Africa imports a lot of seeds, Africa imports a lot of food, Africa imports almost everything. So doing that, we remain consumers in the technology market, in the innovation market, and the cost of capital in terms of financing is high for the continent as well. So what the report is calling for is how we can rethink all these so that African governments can actually take the lead, African researchers takes the lead, and partners join us in helping us to do what they have always been trying to help us to do, which is to develop an inclusive and sustainable pathway that will be sustainable for Africa and sustainable and good for global sustainability as well.